In 1922, the Miller family lived in a remote farmhouse on the outskirts of Elmberg, a quiet village where few ventured, and even fewer ever returned. But when a neighbor went to check on them one fateful morning, the scene he discovered was enough to freeze anyone's blood. The family, once full of life, was found unalive in their home under mysterious circumstances. What makes this case even more unsettling is the strange noises that had plagued the family for weeks before the tragedy. At night when the house was still, the creaks from the attic echoed through the walls, footsteps, shuffling, even whispering. The family had become consumed with fear, locking doors, closing windows, and whispering in the shadows about what they thought was lurking in the attic above them. But what could have caused such fear in the hearts of the Miller family? Was it a stalker? A stranger hiding in the shadows? Or perhaps something more unexpected, something that had always been much closer to them than anyone could have imagined? The horrors that followed would shake the very core of Elmberg. A family destroyed, a village haunted by unanswered questions. Was it the result of human malice? Or had something far darker crept into their lives? The more you uncover about this case, the less you understand. Each new piece of evidence only leads to more confusion. Could someone have been hiding in that house all along? Or was it the family's growing paranoia that drove them to the edge? Stay with me as we unravel the chilling mystery behind the unalive of the Miller family and try to understand why, despite all the evidence, no one could figure out exactly who or what was responsible for their untimely end. Before we go any further, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on. This is just the beginning, and trust me, you don't want to miss the twists that follow in this eerie tale. Elmberg, a sleepy village tucked away in the hills of rural Germany, was the kind of place where people knew each other's business, but nothing ever truly stirred. Most days the streets were quiet, save for the occasional creak of an old wooden cart or the distant moo of cows. It was a place where time seemed to slow down, and the days bled into one another with little to distinguish one from the next. At the edge of Elmberg, tucked away from the rest of the village, stood the Miller farm. It was a modest structure, weathered by years of hard work and the harsh winds of the changing seasons. Wilhelm, the father, was a man who kept to himself. He had inherited the farm from his father, and before that, his grandfather. He was a hard worker, a provider. But as the days wore on, his once firm grip on reality began to slip. Anna, his wife, was more sensitive. She spent her days tending to the house and children, keeping the farm running smoothly. She was a mother first, but the stress of the last few weeks had begun to take a toll on her. It started with the noises. At first, Wilhelm had chalked it up to the wind or the old house settling. But as the days passed, the strange sounds grew louder, more deliberate. A creaking from above, followed by what sounded like scuttling footsteps. It was as though something was moving about in the attic. At night, the flickering lights in the windows would catch the attention of the neighbors, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. Anna grew anxious. She tried to brush it off, but the noises never stopped. The attic door creaked open, the floorboards above their heads groaned, and every night, the children would wake up screaming, afraid of the dark and whatever was lurking above them. Wilhelm, ever protective, would reassure his family, but even he could not shake the nagging feeling that something was not right. But it wasn't just the sounds. There was a shift in the air. Something was wrong, and it was becoming harder to ignore. The family's once peaceful existence had become a cage. Paranoia had set in. They began to avoid looking at each other for too long, as though every glance could be an accusation, every silence a confession. Wilhelm had become withdrawn, leaving the house at odd hours to check the barns and the fields, as though the very land he worked had turned against him. Anna, on the other hand, had begun to write letters to her sister in the village. In them, she spoke of the fear that had taken hold of her. Her handwriting was rushed, desperate even, as if she feared the words themselves would be the next to betray her. The letters were full of vague references to their growing unease. Anna wrote about the restless nights, the feeling of being watched, and the sounds that never stopped. "I don't know who we can trust anymore," one letter read. "I fear we're being watched, but by who, I don't know. I keep hearing things. Wilhelm says it's nothing, but I can't shake it. I'm scared for the children, for us all." But the letters never mentioned the most terrifying part, the part that would haunt Elmberg for years to come. No one knew it at the time, but these letters would be the final communication anyone would ever have with Anna. The weeks dragged on, each one heavier than the last. The family grew weaker, their faces gaunt, their nerves frayed. Neighbors began to notice the odd behavior. Wilhelm's temper had become short, snapping at anyone who came near. Anna's eyes were hollow, her smile forced. The children, once full of life, now seemed perpetually on edge, constantly looking over their shoulders as if they expected someone to jump out at them from the shadows. And then, just as suddenly as the noises had started, they stopped. The attic grew silent, but the silence only made the unease that much more unbearable. It was as though whatever had been there was waiting, watching, and then, without warning, the unimaginable happened. One morning, a neighbor named Fritz noticed that the farm was eerily quiet. He had been expecting Wilhelm to come by for his usual morning visit, but the house stood still, the barn door closed. It wasn't like them to be late. Fritz, uneasy, approached the farmhouse. He knocked at the door, but there was no answer. The silence was thick, oppressive. His heart raced as he pushed the door open, the hinges creaking with an unnatural slowness. He stepped inside. What he found would haunt him for the rest of his life. The family lay in a state of shock, their lives snuffed out in an instant. The sight was horrific, but more unsettling than the scene itself was the feeling that hung in the air, like something had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the silence to fall. But who or what had done this, and why? The police arrived soon after, but the investigation quickly became a web of confusion. There were no signs of forced entry, no footprints leading away from the house, no blood trails. It was as though the killer, or killers, had simply vanished, leaving behind nothing but the bodies and the fear that still lingered in the air. Neighbors spoke of the family's growing paranoia. They spoke of the strange sounds, of the flickering lights, and of the letters Anna had written, but no one could offer any real answers. The only thing that was clear was this: whatever had happened in that house, it wasn't something anyone could explain. Something had been hidden in the shadows of that attic, something that had remained there long enough to become a part of the family's nightmares. And the worst part? No one knew what it was. But as time went on, theories began to emerge. Some whispered of a family curse, but others spoke of a hidden enemy who had known exactly where to strike. Could it have been someone from the village, someone close to them? Or was the truth even darker? Whatever happened, the answers were elusive. The only thing left was the fear that still lingers in Elmberg, a village where the past is never quite forgotten, and the truth remains locked away in the shadows. But the mystery doesn't end there. There are whispers of the house itself, of strange occurrences in the years since the tragedy. Flickering lights, the sound of footsteps, a presence that never truly left. Could the real horror of what happened at the Müller farmhouse still be hiding in plain sight? Or is there something darker waiting to be uncovered? Stay tuned, because this story is far from over. The air in Elmberg was heavy with unease as news of the tragedy spread through the village. It was a grim morning when Fritz, the local farmer, noticed something odd. The Müller farm, which was always busy with the sounds of life, children playing, animals in the yard, was eerily quiet. He had known Wilhelm for years, and it was unlike him to be absent from his morning routine. So, Fritz, feeling the weight of his own suspicion, decided to check on his neighbors. He approached the farmhouse with trepidation, the air thick with a sense of foreboding. The front door, normally locked, was wide open. No sign of life inside. His heart began to race. Something wasn't right. He stepped through the door, his boots creaking on the wooden floor. The house was still, unnaturally so. As he walked deeper into the hall, the smell hit him, a metallic, sickening scent that made his stomach churn. It was faint, almost like a whisper, but unmistakable. Fritz froze at the sight that greeted him. The family, Wilhelm, Anna, the children, lay motionless in the living room. They had been taken from this world. But what chilled Fritz to his core wasn't just the brutality of the act. It was the stillness of it. The way the bodies lay, almost too perfect in their arrangement, as if they had been placed there deliberately. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood leading to or from the scene. No footprints, no broken windows, just silence. Fritz's legs trembled as he backed away, his mind scrambling to make sense of it all. He stumbled outside, calling for help, but his voice sounded small, lost in the vastness of the farm. The police arrived, and within hours, the scene was swarming with investigators. They walked through the house with the solemnity of men facing an impossible task. No one could explain how the murderer, or murderers, had entered the home. There were no forced doors or broken windows. The family's possessions were untouched. Everything was in its place as though the world had simply stopped around them. But then, a neighbor spoke up. He had seen something strange the night before. An unfamiliar figure near the farmhouse, lingering in the shadows just beyond the reach of the dim light. He couldn't remember much about the person, only that they seemed to be watching. But who could it have been, and why had no one thought to question it? The investigators found themselves stuck at a dead end. There was no clear motive, no evidence. It didn't make sense. It was as though the killer had vanished into thin air, leaving nothing but the silence behind. Then, they turned their attention to the attic. At first, the attic had seemed like just another part of the house, old and dusty, with nothing to indicate it held any secrets. But as they searched the home, a strange door in the back corner of the attic was discovered, one that had been hidden beneath layers of dust and cobwebs. When it was opened, the room beyond was revealed. What they found inside was enough to make the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. The attic, once thought to be empty, was filled with personal items belonging to the Müller family. Old clothes, blankets, and books, the things they had left behind. But there was something else, something far more disturbing. The walls, which had once been plain, were now marked with strange symbols and phrases, written in what appeared to be hastily scrawled ink. Whoever had been in that attic had been there for a long time, lurking, waiting. And then there was the noise. The investigators couldn't explain it, but the room felt wrong, as though something was still alive within it. The sense of being watched was suffocating, as if the very air around them was charged with an unseen presence. But that wasn't the most chilling discovery. Among the scattered belongings, one item caught the attention of the lead investigator, a small, weathered diary belonging to Wilhelm Müller. The pages were filled with his personal thoughts, his worries, his dreams. But the last entries were different. They spoke of strange occurrences at the farm, of feeling like someone was always nearby. His last entry read, "I hear them again. I can feel them watching. I don't know who or what they are, but I'm scared. I think we're being watched by something in this house." But when the investigators returned to the attic the next day, the diary was gone. No one had touched it, No one had moved it. It had simply vanished into thin air. The realization struck hard. Someone close to the family, had been in the house all along, and they were still watching. The fear began to spread through the village like wildfire. Rumors swirled about the Miller family's past, about secrets they may have kept. Some whispered that Wilhelm had been hiding something that had led to this unimaginable tragedy. Others spoke of the strange events that had been happening in Elmberg for years, that disappearances, unexplainable occurrences, flickering lights in the distance. Could it all be connected? But the most unsettling question lingered in the air. Who had done this, and why? As the investigation continued, each new discovery seemed to raise more questions than answers. Was the murderer someone from the village, someone who knew the family well? Or was it an outsider, someone who had been watching from the shadows all along? The town of Elmberg was about to learn that the truth was darker than they could have ever imagined. Stay with us as we uncover the terrifying twists and turns of this case. Because the truth, it's not what you think. Not by a long shot. The walls of Elmberg began to close in on the villagers, and with each passing day, the mystery surrounding the Müller family's tragic end only deepened. The silence in the town was now punctuated by whispers, by half-formed theories that everyone felt the need to voice. But no one knew the whole truth, and the closer the investigators got, the further it seemed to slip through their fingers. It was a rainy evening when Margaret, a woman who had known Anna for years, came forward. Her voice trembled as she spoke to the authorities, but there was something urgent in her eyes, a flicker of recognition that sent chills down their spines. She had been one of the last people to speak with Anna before the family's final days. "I didn't want to tell anyone," Margaret whispered, "but Anna, she confided in me about something strange, something disturbing." Her hands trembled as she reached for a small, worn notebook, its edges frayed with age. She passed it over to the investigators, her eyes darting nervously around the room. As they flipped through the pages, it became clear that Anna's fears had been building for weeks. There were descriptions of strange figures moving around the farm, shadows that didn't belong, whispers in the dead of night. But one entry stood out, a chilling warning. "I can't shake the feeling that someone is watching us, not from the ground, but from above. Every time I go into the attic, it feels as though I'm not alone. There's someone there, hiding, waiting. I'm scared, Margaret. Please help us." The words hung in the air like an accusation, but against whom? The investigators exchanged uneasy glances. Could it be that someone from the village had been sneaking into the Müller home, stalking them? Had they been too close all along, hiding in plain sight? The thought gnawed at them, but it wasn't the only thing. As they continued sifting through Wilhelm's belongings, they came across a journal that had been overlooked in the initial search. Its pages, worn and weathered, were filled with Wilhelm's thoughts, his daily musings. But near the end, the entries grew more erratic, more desperate. "Something is up there, in the attic. I can't stop hearing the scuttling, the whispers in the walls. I've started locking the door, but I can't escape the feeling that it's all around us. I think I know who's been hiding there. I know, but I'm too afraid to face it." The investigators stared at the words, trying to make sense of them. Wilhelm's paranoia had become undeniable, but was it just that? Paranoia? Or was there truly someone or something hiding in the attic? The chilling idea that a person, someone familiar, was in the house all along made them uneasy. Could Wilhelm have been right? Was there something or someone lurking in the shadows, watching their every move? But just as they thought they were starting to piece it together, the investigation took an unexpected turn. The day after Wilhelm's journal was discovered, a new lead came to light. A witness who had seen a figure unrecognizable, leaving the Miller farmhouse the night before the tragedy. It was strange, though. The person was not alone. Someone else had been with them. But the second figure, as soon as the witness tried to get a closer look, had vanished without a trace. The idea of someone vanishing into thin air had always seemed like something out of a horror tale. But it was happening right here, in Elmberg. As the investigation deepened, the strange occurrences that had plagued the Miller family began to unfold in the very village itself. Investigators reported strange noises at the station in the dead of night, whispers echoing down empty hallways. Lights flickered and doors slammed shut, only to open by themselves. Each event mirrored the terrifying occurrences the Miller family had described in their final days. Was it coincidence? Or was someone trying to stop the truth from being uncovered? The villagers could feel it, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. Fear swept through the streets like a contagion. The question that everyone feared to ask was no longer just speculation. Could the murderer still be out there, living among them, watching them? The villagers were no longer safe. They knew it. They could feel eyes on them, lurking in the corners of their homes, their every step tracked by an unseen presence. But the terror wasn't just in the night. It was in their homes, in their minds. No one knew who could be trusted anymore. And then, just when the investigators thought they had uncovered the identity of the killer, they were struck by a revelation that turned everything they knew upside down. The murderer. Was it someone from within the Miller family? The discovery came in the form of a hidden letter. It was a letter Anna had written before her death, addressed to someone she referred to only as "my dear one." In it, she confessed to a secret so dark, so shocking, that it sent shockwaves through the investigation. The letter described how Wilhelm had begun to change. He had become distant, obsessed with the idea that someone was coming for them, someone who would never stop until they were destroyed. Anna had tried to protect her children, to keep them safe from the terror that was slowly unraveling their lives. But could it be true? Was someone from the family responsible for their unthinkable fate? Or was the true answer far worse than anyone could have ever imagined? The clock was ticking. The deeper the investigators went, the more twisted the truth became. And as the village of Elmberg began to fall into chaos, one thing was clear. The darkness surrounding the Miller family's deaths was only beginning to reveal itself. But the question remained, would anyone survive long enough to uncover it? As the investigation reached its peak, the small town of Elmberg was consumed by the growing tension, the mystery spiraling beyond anyone's control. Theories began to form, each more unsettling than the last, but none could offer the comfort of closure. The truth was far more elusive than anyone could have predicted. One of the most disturbing theories revolved around the attic, the place where the Miller family had heard the strange sounds for weeks. What if someone had been hiding there all along, watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike? The idea of an attic dweller, a deranged person living in the shadows, slowly driving the family to madness, was terrifying. How could they have missed it? How could the family have failed to notice something or someone so close, yet so hidden? The thought that someone might have been secretly watching them, hidden above their heads, was enough to make even the bravest investigator feel a chill. But as the investigation continued, a darker, more chilling theory began to take shape. What if the truth wasn't external, but internal? What if the murderer was one of their own? The idea of family betrayal hung heavily over the investigation. Could it be that someone within the Miller family had finally snapped, pushed to the edge by something buried deep within their lives? Secrets, lies, long-held grudges. It was all too possible. Could one of them have turned on the others in a moment of rage, jealousy, or madness? The more they uncovered, the more it seemed like no one could be trusted. And then there was the theory that some villagers refused to let go of. The possibility that the house was cursed, the dark, foreboding nature of the Muller farmhouse, had always made people uneasy. The strange occurrences that surrounded the family, the whispers in the night, the flickering lights. Some believed it wasn't a simple case of human malice, but something far more mysterious. Was it possible that something supernatural had been at work, a force beyond the realm of reason, twisting the family's minds until they reached their breaking point? Or perhaps the house itself had been the catalyst, drawing in the darkness and unleashing it upon them. Some of the older villagers spoke in hushed tones, warning others to stay far away from the farmhouse. They believed that the land itself was cursed, that it had witnessed unspeakable things long before the Millers arrived. But with each theory, the investigation only seemed to raise more questions than answers. Had the killer truly left the house that night? Or had they remained hidden, living among them all, unnoticed, until they were ready to strike again? Was someone else, perhaps, continuing the legacy of fear that had gripped the Miller family? The townsfolk couldn't help but wonder. They couldn't escape the nagging feeling that the murderer might still be closer than they ever realized. As the case grew colder, the questions began to outweigh the answers. Who was responsible for the horror that had unfolded in Elmberg? The town, once peaceful and quiet, was now gripped by the uncertainty of knowing that someone, or something, was still out there. No one felt safe anymore. Everyone was a suspect, and no one knew who could be trusted. The mystery of the Muller family would forever haunt Elmberg. The case remained unsolved, leaving behind a town that would never be the same. The whispers, the strange happenings, and the fear, it all remained, lingering in the shadows, waiting for someone else to stumble upon it. And so, the story of the Muller family was left unfinished, a chilling reminder that sometimes the truth is too terrifying to uncover. The killer, or killers, were never found, but their legacy, that would stay with the villagers forever. What do you think happened on that dark night in Elmberg? Was there something far worse than a human hand at work? Could the family have been victims of something beyond explanation? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more chilling true crime stories. Could the answers be closer than we think? Or will this dark mystery continue to haunt us all? The story of the Muller family remains one of Elmberg's darkest and most unsettling chapters. A quiet family, living in isolation, was torn apart by a horrific end that no one could have predicted. Their final days were marked by fear, suspicion, and the disturbing sounds echoing from the attic. A sound that no one could explain, but everyone could hear. The investigation uncovered more questions than answers. There were theories of someone lurking in the attic, quietly watching the family's descent into paranoia. But that only raised more suspicions. Could someone have been living there, hidden all along, waiting for the right moment to strike? Or was it something more? A family member, unraveling under the pressure of untold secrets, turning on those they were meant to protect? Or perhaps the most unsettling theory of all, the house itself, cursed by the very land it stood on, driving its inhabitants to madness. The investigation continued to reveal more twists. Neighbors spoke of strange figures, eerie sounds, and unsettling encounters that hinted at a presence, unseen but ever watchful. But in the end, the truth seemed to slip further away with each passing day. No one was ever charged. No one was ever held accountable. The mystery of the Muller family's fate remained unsolved, leaving a town haunted by the unknown. As the years passed, the The farmhouse remained abandoned, a decaying shell of the home it once was. Some say the land still holds the echoes of what happened there, while others believe the truth will never be known. The question remains, who was behind the horror that unfolded in Elmberg? Was it a stranger, lurking in the shadows, or something far closer to home? What do you think happened to the Muller family? Was it someone inside the family, or a stranger hiding in the attic? Could it have been something else entirely? Something beyond human understanding? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to explore more chilling cases and unsolved mysteries, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell to make sure you don't miss the next dark tale waiting to be uncovered. The truth may be closer than we think, but are we ready for it?